Legendary sports agent Leigh Steinberg joins us. Leigh, we appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Comcast Sportsnet. And before we get into the many sides of Al Davis, which you probably got to see more than anybody else, just your reaction to his passing today.
You know, I'm very sad. I gave the presenting speech for Warren Moon at the Hall of Fame back in Canton in the summer of 2006. And Al was presenting John Madden. And while he got up and gave an eloquent speech from the podium, he sat right back down in a wheelchair, and they were pushing him all around for the weekend. And it was clear to me that he was fading. And I just hope that people can remember the Al Davis who innovated the game of football with the vertical passing game, who created a unique franchise of characters, who had his own system of scouting, who had the best information system in the league, and who pioneered the AFL and forced a merger, which, unless you're of a certain age, you don't even remember there were two leagues. And I hope they remember him as a vital innovator in the NFL, as someone who pushed African Americans to be coaches and union leaders, as opposed to the later days where the game a little bit passed him by.
Yeah, well, as we said earlier before you joined us, an entire generation of football fans will unfortunately remember Al Davis for the Jamarcus Russell years, but he was so much more than that to the NFL. And you represented a number of great players that played under Al Davis, chief amongst them Howie Long. Leigh, can you tell us a little bit about what some of your interactions with Al were like, especially when it came to negotiating contracts for your guys?
Well, I had a sort of unique relationship with the Raiders because I went to law school and undergrad at Berkeley, and they were the closest team, and I sort of fell in love with them because they had so many oddball characters and so many colorful players. I mean, they had the Lalo Zados and Matuzaks and Charles Filias, and as well as Stabler and Blentnikoff and Cliff Branch and Upshaw and Shell and so many more. So I bought season tickets while I was in school, and I held them all these years, and even representing 60 first-round draft picks and 8 players that were first pick in the round, representing hundreds of players. That was the only time I ever had season tickets. In 1976, my second year of representing athletes, the Raiders had the second pick, were ready to draft in the second round. And their brain trust voted 9-1 to take the place kicker Chris Barr from Penn State. And I had Jeb Blunt, who was called the Tossing Tolson, and he was quarterback at Tulsa. And the Raider pick came, and it was the Raiders select Jeb Blunt. So you can guess who the one was. The vote was 9-1, but the one was Al Davis, and he would end up having his own unique ability to gauge power and project athletic performance over a series of years. Well, I had a home when I started representing athletes in the hills of Berkeley, overlooking the campus and the city and Oakland, and the phone would ring. It would be midnight, and I would hear this voice that would say, Leigh, Al here, what do you know? And he would then proceed to pick my brain about every morsel I knew, because he was hoping to garner that one critical piece of information that would make the Raiders a more competitive team. So he would go on, and he would digress into subjects he cared about, like the Greek wars, the politics of Machiavelli in Italy, the Civil War. He had an eclectic reach in terms of history, and he had a curious accent, which was part Brooklyn and part the Deep South. So, and it would sort of come and go. Well, anyway, the night would roll on, and I would be learning more about football, how to build a franchise, how to be an innovator than had I gone to the University of California at the NFL. And the time would pass, and he'd go on. And all of a sudden, the campanile would ring, and it would be about 5 bells, which meant it was 5 in the morning. He was still talking. And so this would go on and on for years. And he had a network of general managers, owners, players, agents, trainers, football secretaries that was as comprehensive as the CIA. And I remember one time he liked unusual bodies, so he drafts Charles Filial, who was a defensive end from the Deep South, and he said, Leigh, you know, he really needs some help. He doesn't have an agent. So I took him, and Charles was country, I mean deep country, and he ended up asking me questions like why the running back Mark Van Egan got both names on the back of his uniform when he just got Filial. And that was the type of unique player he liked. He had his boys. I remember once he called me up, and he was enamored with Jim Lachey, who was left tackle All-Pro of San Diego. And I said, Al, you know, Jim's unhappy. He'd like to be traded, but how are you ever going to get their starting left tackle out of Oakland? He said, "Oh, don't worry about it." And turned out Steve Ortmeyer, who had worked for the Raiders, was down there, and Al arranged to make a trade for an All-Pro left tackle with. He gave him Napoleon Kaufman, I think, in a 4th-round draft pick, which was not a very fair trade. Later in his career, Howie Long was holding out, and he said to me, you know, I want a new contract. I want to redo it. Well, Al had a way of getting angry at players who crossed him, especially if they were his guys. That was the core of the team that he developed long-term relationships with. And so you could ask Marcus Allen or you could ask Steve Berline what it's like to be on his bad list because, you know, you're in football limbo or purgatory. So I had real apprehension in how he was holding out, and I said, Howie, this could be disastrous. I don't want to end up like Steve Berline or Marcus Allen. He said, don't worry about it. I'm one of Al's boys. Al takes care of his boys. And he gave Howie exactly the contract Howie wanted. And what you didn't see of Al Davis was the fact that if someone had dedicated loyalty and put their heart and soul into the Raiders, he felt a fiduciary responsibility to take care of them for the rest of their life. He would send people to specialists at hospitals. He would pay hospital bills. When players were in bad economic shape, he would help them. And he stuck very, very loyal to his hardcore. He loved players and was very, very hands-on. And again, that's the Al Davis to remember, who was engaged, who had his own unique vertical passing game, who had ways of scouting talent that seemed outside the box, who had the most information anyone around, who was always looking for new innovations. You know, not the Al Davis of later days, because he had gotten frail and you know, they had not developed an organization that had the strength to operate without him.
All right. Leigh, some great stuff there. One last one before we let you go, and we certainly appreciate your time. Do you, and obviously this is something that has to be asked moving forward, do you have any inkling of what direction this franchise is going to go? Is it going to be his son Mark that's going to call the shots in the interim, or do you have any inkling at all?
Well, you know, he was managing general partners, so the concept of him being the owner was never right. He never owned a majority of the team. But so there are, I think they're going to have to get all of the shareholders and partners together and figure that out. Because, see, the key to winning in football is the quality of the organization. It's having a plan, a long-term plan. It's stability. It's knowing how to implement with the right talent evaluators and coaches and the rest of it. So this is an absolutely critical decision. And if they get young, bright leadership in there, it will make all the difference.
Leigh, again, we appreciate the time. Thanks very much for sharing some of your interactions with Al Davis over the years, and thanks for taking the time to join us here on Comcast.
Well, you know, I'll miss him. I'll miss the phone calls, but I'm sure he's up there keeping tabs on everyone.
Yeah, I got a feeling the Raiders might win tomorrow in Houston. I don't know how you're feeling about that, but we'll see.
You know, if you if you can't win under these circumstances, nothing will ever motivate a team, right?
Well, and there might be a little divine intervention coming from above as well. I appreciate the time, Leigh. Thanks for checking in.
My pleasure.
All right, Leigh Steinberg. And with